Hello, sleep seekers. Tonight we're doing something different. Instead of discussing history or philosophy or the lives of interesting people who did interesting things, we're going to experience something directly. We're going to spend a day, perhaps several days, time becomes somewhat fluid in these circumstances, living as a Zen monk in a traditional monastery. Not thinking about what it might be like, but experiencing it as fully as words can convey. The sounds, the sensations, the slow passage of hours, the repetition, the cold, the silence, the gradual wearing away of everything you thought you knew about yourself. Close your eyes if they're not closed already. Settle into whatever position you're in, and let yourself become someone else, somewhere else, living a life so different from your own that it might as well be on another planet. Though it's just Japan, or perhaps California, or anywhere a Zen monastery exists, and people have decided to spend years sitting very still, doing very little, for reasons that seem obvious from inside the practice and completely baffling from outside it. 3:30 a.m. The wooden board. You hear it before you're fully awake. Tock, 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 tock. The wooden board being struck, the sound starting slow and accelerating into rapid staccato that fills the dark building, bounces off wooden walls, penetrates through your blanket and your sleep, and the resistance your body has to consciousness at this hour. It's still dark, completely dark, winter dark. 4 a.m. Morning Zazen. The meditation hall, the zendo, is long and narrow, with raised platforms along both walls. Small oil lamps provide minimal light, just enough to see where you're going, not enough to see clearly, which doesn't matter because you're going to be facing the wall anyway, and walls don't require much light to perceive. You walk to your spot. Not any spot, but your specific spot. Your assigned position on the platform that you've sat on every morning for months or years, that you'll sit on tomorrow and the day after. The wooden platform worn smooth by decades of previous monks sitting in exactly these positions. The continuity stretching back through time until your sitting becomes indistinguishable from their sitting. All of you doing the same thing, facing the same walls, pursuing the same unclear goal. You arrange your cushions, the zabuton flat on the platform, the zafu, the round sitting cushion, on top, positioned so your sit bones rest on the front edge, tilting your pelvis forward slightly, maintaining the natural curve of your spine. You've been taught the posture in excruciating detail. Knees touch the zabuton, forming stable tripod with your sit bones. Back straight but not rigid. Chin slightly tucked. Hands folded in cosmic mudra. Left hand resting on right hand, thumbs barely touching, forming oval that represents the universe, or emptiness, or your mind, or nothing in particular, depending on which teacher explained it. You settle into position. The cushion is firm but familiar. Your knees complain immediately, because they always complain, because sitting cross-legged for extended periods is not something human knees enjoy, regardless of how spiritually beneficial it supposedly is. You adjust slightly, finding the position where the discomfort is tolerable rather than acute, knowing this position will become increasingly intolerable over the next 40 minutes, but starting from the least uncomfortable place available. The bell rings 3 clear tones that mark the beginning of sitting. The sound fills the hall, resonates in your chest, fades slowly into silence, then just silence. The silence of 30 people sitting completely still, breathing quietly, facing walls, doing nothing visible, though presumably doing something internally. Though what that something is remains mysterious, even after all this time. You face the wall. It's white plaster, slightly uneven, showing age and wear. There's a small crack in the plaster about 2 feet from the floor, slightly left of center from where you're sitting. You've looked at this crack for hundreds of hours. You know its shape, its texture, the way light catches on its edges. You could draw it from memory if anyone asked you to, which no one will, because knowing the exact shape of a crack in a wall is not useful knowledge outside of this very specific context. The instruction is simple. Sit with an upright posture, pay attention to your breath, let thoughts arise and pass without engaging them, maintain awareness without grasping at anything or pushing anything away. Simple instructions that prove impossibly difficult to follow because your mind immediately starts doing everything except what you've been instructed to do. You notice your breath, in, out, the slight coolness of air entering your nostrils, the warmth of air leaving, the expansion of your belly on the inhale, the settling on the exhale. This lasts approximately 15 seconds before your mind wanders to what you'll have for breakfast, whether it will be rice gruel or rice gruel, the exciting variety of monastery meals, whether there will be pickles with the rice gruel, and if so, which kind of pickles. Then you realize you're thinking about pickles instead of breathing. Return attention to breath. In, out. 3 breaths before thinking about. The interview with the teacher later today, Doku-san. You're working on mu, have been working on mu for 8 months, have no idea what mu means, or how to present your understanding when you don't have understanding to present. The anxiety about this tightens your shoulders, speeds your breath, creates tension that you then notice and try to release. But trying to release tension creates different tension, the tension of trying, of effort, of not being able to just relax naturally, because relaxing naturally isn't natural when you're trying to do it. Return to breath, in, out. Your left foot is falling asleep. The tingling starts at the toes, spreads to the arch, the characteristic pins and needles sensation that signals blood flow is being restricted, and your foot is not happy about this arrangement. You adjust slightly, shifting weight infinitesimally, trying to restore circulation without making obvious movement that would disturb the silence, that would acknowledge you can't even sit still properly, that you're still struggling with the basic physical requirements of this practice after all this time. In, out. Someone coughs. The sound is shockingly loud in the silence, makes you aware of how quiet it's been, how any sound becomes enormous when surrounded by this much silence. The person who coughed probably feels self-conscious, is probably thinking about having coughed instead of meditating, is now meditating on self-consciousness about coughing, which is at least meditation on something, even if it's not quite what was intended. Your back aches. The space between your shoulder blades, the spot that always aches during sitting, the spot you've tried various adjustments to address, but which apparently will just ache until you die or achieve enlightenment. Whichever comes first. A low-grade suffering that you're supposed to observe without reacting to, supposed to accept without aversion, supposed to make peace with, though making peace with chronic discomfort is considerably easier to instruct than to accomplish. In, out. You realize you've been thinking about your back instead of watching your breath. Return attention to breathing. How many times have you returned attention to breathing? Hundreds of times this sitting, thousands of times this week, tens of thousands of times since you started practicing. The returning is the practice, apparently. Not staying focused, but noticing when you've wandered and returning, again and again. The patience with your own distraction gradually supposedly creating capacity for sustained attention, though evidence of this increased capacity remains elusive. Time dilates. Has it been 5 minutes or 30 minutes? Impossible to tell. The only reference points are bodily discomfort, which increases steadily, and the depth of the darkness outside, visible through the small high windows, which lightens imperceptibly slowly. The kind of slow that makes you understand geological timescales, how mountains erode grain by grain, how change can be happening while appearing not to happen at all. Your right knee is now joining your left foot in protest. The knee pain is sharper than the foot numbness, more insistent, the kind of pain that makes you think about damage, about whether you're actually hurting yourself, whether spiritual practice should involve this much physical discomfort, or whether this is just poor ergonomics being rationalized as training. No one else seems to be adjusting position, no one else is obviously uncomfortable, which means either they're all better at this than you, or they're all suffering silently. Both possibilities equally plausible. You hear the morning birds beginning outside. Not many birds, not a full dawn chorus, just a few early risers testing the air, sending out tentative calls. The birds don't care that you're meditating. They don't care about Zen, about enlightenment, about any of this. They're just being birds, which, according to some interpretations, is already enlightened activity, being fully what you are, without self-consciousness, or doubt, or trying to be something else. The birds have achieved what you're struggling towards simply by being birds, which is either encouraging or frustrating depending on how you look at it.
The monks form a line for walking meditation kinhin. This is not walking in the normal sense, not getting from point A to point B with reasonable efficiency, but walking as meditation, walking so slowly that each step takes approximately 10 seconds, walking that is somehow more difficult than sitting still, because at least sitting still doesn't pretend to be a different activity. You place your hands in shashu position, left hand in a fist, with thumb inside, right hand covering it, held at your sternum, elbows out slightly. Your posture remains upright, gaze slightly downward, watching the floor about 6 feet ahead. The line begins moving, or rather, beginning the process that will eventually result in having moved, though movement is perhaps too generous a term for this incremental shifting of weight. You lift your right foot slowly, mindfully, aware of the sensation of foot leaving floor, of weight transferring to left foot, of the foot rising through air. The foot moves forward half a foot, perhaps slightly less, certainly not a full step by normal standards. The foot descends slowly, heel touching first, then the rest of the foot settling onto the wooden floor with exaggerated deliberation. Weight shifts. The left foot begins its journey. 10 seconds per step. The person in front of you moves at exactly the same pace, maintaining precise distance, not too close, not too far. The person behind you presumably does the same, though you can't see them, can only trust that the line continues, that you're all engaged in this same slow procession around the meditation hall, this walking that's barely walking, this movement that's almost stillness. The pace is so slow that there's enormous time between steps, enormous space for thinking about not thinking, for noticing that you're thinking, for trying to return attention to the physical sensation of walking, which lasts approximately 2 seconds before more thoughts arise.
You watch the boredom. Notice how it creates restlessness, generates desire for something anything to happen, produces fantasies about what you'll do when sitting is over, when you can move, when you can eat, when you can do literally anything except continue sitting here facing this wall. The boredom has texture. It's not uniform, but varying, sometimes dull ache of tedium, sometimes sharp frustration, sometimes flat resignation, sometimes even space where boredom lifts briefly, and there's just sitting, just breathing, just this moment without judgment or desire, or the need for it to be different than it is. In, out. These moments of just sitting don't last. Seconds maybe, before the mind reasserts itself, before thoughts return, before you're once again narrating your experience instead of simply having it. But they're real, these moments, however brief. They're what you're practicing for, supposedly. These gaps in the constant mental commentary, these flashes of direct experience unmediated by thought. Or perhaps you're romanticizing, making ordinary mental quiet into spiritual achievement, because you need to believe these hours of sitting are producing something beyond sore knees and familiarity with plaster cracks. In, out. 6 a.m. Chanting service. The bell rings. Different pattern this time, the signal for the morning service. Everyone stands, forms lines, processes from the meditation hall to the Buddha hall, a larger room with an altar, golden Buddha statue, offerings of fruit and flowers, incense burning in large braziers, the smell thick and sweet and slightly overwhelming after the relatively neutral air of the meditation hall. You take your position, standing in rows, facing the altar. The head monk begins chanting, and everyone joins, the voices creating layered sound, not quite harmonious but unified, the words in Japanese or Sanskrit or Chinese, languages you don't fully understand, chants you've memorized phonetically, meaning less important than the sound, the vibration, the collective voice filling the space. The chanting is rhythmic, hypnotic. Your voice joins the others, the words flowing automatically after months of repetition, your conscious mind able to wander while your voice continues the patterns it knows by heart. This is actually restful. After sitting, standing is easy compared to crossed legs. Chanting is active compared to silent breath watching. Your body and voice engaged in coordinated activity that doesn't require the sustained attention that meditation demands. The Heart Sutra, you recognize it, have chanted it hundreds of times, the famous lines about form being emptiness and emptiness being form, about there being no eyes, no ears, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no suffering, no path, no wisdom, no attainment. The words are radical, denying the reality of basically everything, proclaiming the emptiness of all phenomena, but chanted at 6 a.m. in a cold Buddha hall by tired monks, they sound more like repetition than revelation, more like institutional obligation than living truth. But the sound is beautiful. The collective voice, the rhythm, the way the chant fills the hall and seems to resonate in your chest, in your bones. There's something primal about group chanting, something that bypasses rational mind and speaks to older parts of consciousness, parts that respond to rhythm and repetition and collective voice before language emerged, before individual identity became dominant, parts that remember being part of tribe, part of something larger than separate self. The chanting continues for 20 minutes, moving through various sutras, each with its own melody, its own rhythm. Some you know well, some less so. Your voice sometimes strong, sometimes fading to murmur, sometimes silent for a few lines, while you catch breath or rest voice, or simply stop engaging for a moment before rejoining the collective sound. Then bowing. Deep bows, full prostrations, hands and forehead touching the floor, entire body, expressing reverence or submission or humility, or something that perhaps isn't captured accurately by English words, but is understood through the physical act of making yourself small, making yourself low, acknowledging something greater than yourself, whether that's Buddha, Dharma, Sangha, or simply the practice itself, the lineage, the thousands of monks who have made these same bows in these same ways for centuries. 3 prostrations, mindfully done. Down to the floor, hands near your head, palms up as if receiving something, then rising again, standing, hands together at chest, then down again, repeating. The movement is familiar now, the body knowing what to do, the initial awkwardness long gone, replaced by muscle memory, by comfort with the physical vocabulary of reverence that initially felt foreign but has become natural through repetition. The service ends. Everyone processes back to the meditation hall, but you don't return to sitting. Instead, you go to the dining hall for breakfast, grateful for the change, grateful to sit on a bench instead of a cushion, grateful that food is finally approaching, even if that food is rice gruel. 6:30 a.m. Breakfast. Oryoki. The dining hall is simple, long wooden tables, benches on either side. Nothing decorative, nothing unnecessary. You take your seat, the same seat you've occupied for months, part of the same silent choreography that governs every activity here, everyone knowing their place, their role, their function in the collective rhythm. In front of you is your oryoki set, your eating bowls wrapped in cloth. 3 bowls nested together, wrapped in a specific way that you'll now unwrap in an equally specific way, because even unwrapping bowls is formalized here, is practice, is opportunity for mindfulness, or at least for following prescribed movements that prevent you from thinking about anything else. You unwrap the cloth, unfolding it along specific lines, laying it flat in front of you. The 3 bowls emerge, largest for rice gruel, medium for pickles, smallest for water. There's also a spatula, cloth for wiping, and small stick for cleaning, each item placed in exact position on the cloth, creating a small mandala of eating implements arranged with precision that would seem excessive if you weren't doing it every morning, if you hadn't learned that this precision is the point, that attention to these small details is training in attention itself. The servers enter carrying pots of rice, gruel OKU, thin rice porridge cooked with more water than normal rice. Warm, pale, simple. One server stops at the head of your table, ladle poised. You lift your largest bowl with both hands, holding it at chest height, signaling you're ready to receive. The server ladles gruel into your bowl, not too much, not too little, just right, the amount determined by tradition and the monastery's supplies, and the need to feed everyone adequately without waste. You place the bowl back on the cloth, bow slightly to acknowledge the server, the food, the effort that brought this meal to existence, the rice growing in fields, the farmers tending it, the person who cooked it this morning while you were sitting in meditation, the entire chain of causes and conditions that produced this simple meal. Another server comes with pickles, tsukemono, vegetables preserved in salt and rice bran, providing contrast to the bland gruel, providing minerals and vitamins and flavor that makes the meal slightly less austere. A small portion goes into your medium bowl. Then tea, poured into the smallest bowl, green tea that's been brewed strong, that will help wake you further, that contains caffeine you've been without since yesterday afternoon. When everyone has been served, a bell rings, small bell, clear tone signaling you may begin eating. Not before, even if you've been served for several minutes, even if your gruel is getting cold, even if your stomach is loudly insisting that food should enter it immediately. You wait, because waiting is also practice. because individual desire yields to collective rhythm, because that's how this works. You lift the bowl to your mouth, traditional style, not setting it on the table and spooning from it, but holding it close, bringing it to your lips, using the spatula to guide food from bowl to mouth. The gruel is warm, bland, comforting. The texture is smooth, requiring no chewing, sliding down easily. It's not delicious, not exciting, but after 2 hours of meditation in the cold without food since yesterday evening, it's deeply satisfying in ways that transcend flavor. You eat slowly, mindfully, attending to each mouthful, or at least attempting to attend to each mouthful, though your mind still wanders, still thinks about the day ahead, the work period, the interview with the teacher, the evening sitting, the endless routine that structures time here. The pickles are salty, sour, crunchy, intense after the bland gruel, waking your mouth, providing contrast. You take small amounts, making them last, parceling them out across the meal, rather than eating them all at once, because portion control is part of the practice, because desire and restraint and finding balance between them is what you're working with constantly. The tea is bitter, hot, good. You sip it between bites of gruel and pickles, the caffeine beginning to work, the fog of early morning starting to lift, clarity emerging, or at least alertness, which isn't the same as clarity but is easier to achieve and feels similar if you don't examine too closely. No one speaks. 30 people eating together in complete silence creates odd atmosphere, intimate and impersonal simultaneously, communal meal without conversation, sharing space without sharing words. You can hear every sound, the scrape of spatula on bowl, the slight slurp of someone drinking tea, the shuffle of feet on floor, the creak of bench as someone shifts position.
These sounds, normally background noise buried under conversation, become prominent, noticeable, part of the meal's texture. When you finish eating, when your bowls are empty or nearly empty, you perform the cleaning ritual. Hot water is passed around. You pour a small amount into your largest bowl. Use the small cleaning stick to scrape any remaining gruel. Swirl the water around, cleaning the bowl. You drink this water, waste nothing. Let nothing be discarded that can be consumed. The cleaning water becoming part of the meal, slightly rice-flavored, vaguely unappetizing, but acceptable.
When you finish eating, when your bowls are empty or nearly empty, you perform the cleaning ritual. Hot water is passed around. You pour small amount into your largest bowl. Use the small cleaning stick to scrape any remaining gruel. Swirl the water around, cleaning the bowl. You drink this water, waste nothing, let nothing be discarded that can be consumed. The cleaning water becoming part of the meal, slightly rice-flavored, vaguely unappetizing but acceptable, part of the practice of accepting what is rather than desiring what isn't. You clean the other bowls similarly, using progressively less water, drinking each round until the bowls are clean enough, until you can dry them with the wiping cloth, until you can nest them back together and wrap them in their cloth and return them to their stored state, ready for the next meal. The whole process a small ceremony of maintenance, of care, of attention to objects and their proper treatment. The bell rings again. Meal is complete. Everyone stands, bows, returns to their rooms or to the meditation hall, or to whatever activity comes next in the schedule. You return your oryoki to its shelf, the same shelf where everyone's oryoki lives between meals. The rows of wrapped sets identical, indistinguishable. Each person's eating bowls looking exactly like every other person's. The uniformity intentional, part of the dissolution of individual identity into collective practice. 7:30 a.m. Samu, work practice. After breakfast comes work period, Samu, where meditation extends into physical activity, where the stillness of sitting finds expression in sweeping, cleaning, gardening, cooking, maintaining the monastery's buildings and grounds. This is not considered separate from spiritual practice, but continuation of it, different form of the same attention, same presence, same letting go of self-concern that sitting meditation cultivates. You've been assigned to sweep the paths in the garden, the same assignment you've had for months, the same paths you sweep every morning, the same stones and moss and carefully maintained simplicity that you've come to know intimately through repetition, through daily engagement, through the slow familiarity that comes from doing the same thing over and over until the activity itself becomes unremarkable, becomes just what you do, becomes background rather than task. You collect your broom from the shed, bamboo broom, worn smooth from use, the bristles shaped by years of contact with stone paths, with wooden floors, with the various surfaces they've been applied to by you and by previous monks who used this same broom before you arrived. The handle fits your hands naturally now, the weight familiar, the balance known. The garden is beautiful in the morning light, though beauty isn't quite the right word. It's more like rightness, appropriateness, the sense that everything is exactly as it should be, that the stones are properly positioned, the moss properly tended, the paths properly swept, creating environment that encourages settling, slowing, noticing. You begin sweeping. The motion is simple, repetitive. Push the broom forward, pull it back. Gather the leaves and twigs and dust. Move forward slightly. Repeat. There's rhythm to it, cadence that your body finds without thinking, that happens automatically once you've done it enough times, that requires no conscious direction, freeing your mind to either settle into the activity or wander through thoughts while your body continues working. This morning, your mind wanders. Thoughts arise about the upcoming interview with the teacher, Doku-san, scheduled for this afternoon. You've been working on the koan Mu for 8 months, sitting with it, becoming it, trying to penetrate it, though trying is supposedly the problem, though you don't know how to not try, how to engage without effort, how to practice without practicing. The paradox remaining unresolved despite months of sitting with it. Sweep. The leaves gather in small piles. Sweep. The path shows its stones more clearly as the debris is removed. Sweep. The motion continues regardless of your thoughts, your concerns, your anxiety about whether you'll ever understand this koan, or whether you're simply not suited for this practice, whether you should acknowledge defeat and return to ordinary life where people don't sit facing walls, trying to understand what mu means and why it matters. The teacher, the Roshi, is elderly, has been practicing for over 50 years, has the kind of presence that suggests depth, realization, something achieved that you can't quite articulate, but can sense in the way he moves, speaks, simply exists. He's also intimidating, capable of seeing through pretense, through intellectual understanding that masquerades as realization, through the various ways students try to fake insight when they haven't actually penetrated the koan. You've presented your understanding several times. Each time he's rung the bell. Dismissal, rejection, indication that you haven't seen what needs to be seen. Sometimes he's offered hints. Become mu completely. Don't think about mu. Be mu. What is mu before you think about it? These hints are supposedly helpful, but they feel like being told to lift yourself by your own bootstraps. Instructions that are technically clear, but practically impossible. Sweep. A stone has shifted slightly out of position. You nudge it back with your foot, maintaining the path's integrity, maintaining the careful arrangement that someone, probably a monk decades ago, established, and that everyone since has maintained through daily attention, through noticing small disturbances and correcting them, through collective care that preserves beauty across generations. The moss beside the path is deep green, soft, ancient. You avoid stepping on it. Stepping on moss damages it, compresses it, takes years to recover. The paths are narrow, partly for aesthetic reasons, partly to force attention to where you're walking, to prevent careless trampling of the cultivation that surrounds you. Sweep. The pile of debris grows. You'll gather it into a basket later, take it to the compost area where it will decay, return to soil, feed the next generation of plants, the cycle continuing. Nothing wasted, everything returning to the whole. 9 a.m. Study period. After work period, there's time for study, reading Buddhist texts, working with your teacher's guidance, engaging intellectually with the Dharma, even though intellectual understanding is supposedly not the point, even though direct experience is emphasized over conceptual knowledge, even though reading about enlightenment is not the same as enlightenment itself. You sit in the library, small room with shelves of books, mostly in Japanese, some in English, translations of sutras, commentaries by various masters, works on Buddhist philosophy and practice. You've been assigned to read a collection of Dogen's essays, Shobo Genzo, dense, poetic, philosophical texts that require slow reading, repeated reading, that reveal layers of meaning gradually, that resist quick comprehension in ways that feel either profound or unnecessarily obscure, depending on your mood. Today's essay is about time, being time, Dogen's exploration of how being and time are not separate, how each moment contains all moments, how past, present, and future exist simultaneously from the perspective of true reality rather than conventional linear understanding. The essay is beautiful and confusing, full of assertions that sound meaningful but resist clear interpretation. Time is not separate from being, nor being from time. All moments are complete in themselves. There is no time that is not being time. 12 p.m. Formal lunch. Oryoki. The lunch bell echoes through the monastery, deeper tone than morning bells, signaling the main meal of the day, the only substantial food you'll receive until tomorrow's breakfast. Though substantial is relative in a place where abundance is viewed with suspicion, and moderation is considered its own form of generosity. You return to the dining hall, take your seat at the familiar table, begin the ritual unwrapping of your oryoki bowls once again. The movements are identical to breakfast. Same cloth, same unfolding pattern, same precise placement of bowls and utensils. But your body is different now, more awake, more hungry. anticipating this meal with an urgency that breakfast didn't inspire, because breakfast was too close to sleep, too early in the day for genuine appetite beyond basic biological need. The servers enter, carrying larger pots this time. Rice. Actual rice, not gruel. Each grain separate and properly cooked. White and steaming in your bowl when you lift it to receive your portion. This is luxury here. Solid rice. Something to chew. Something with substance and weight. You bow to the server with genuine gratitude. Not the automatic gesture of mourning, but real appreciation for this food, this fuel, this pleasure that's rare enough to be noticed, valued, not taken for granted. Miso soup comes next, darker than morning tea, thicker, with bits of tofu and seaweed floating in the broth. Salt and umami flavors that make your mouth water, that wake your appetite fully. Into the medium bowl it goes, steam rising, the smell reaching you before the liquid settles, triggering hunger that's been building since breakfast's meager portion 6 hours ago. Then vegetables, pickled radish, blanched greens, perhaps some simmered root vegetables, if the season and supplies permit. Simple preparations, minimal seasoning, letting the vegetables taste like themselves, rather than masking them with complex flavors. The culinary philosophy matching the spiritual one. See things as they are. Don't add unnecessary complications. Find sufficiency in simplicity. The bell rings. You may eat. The rice is perfect, slightly sticky, slightly sweet. The kind of perfect that only comes from rice cooked by someone who's cooked thousands of pots of rice, who knows exactly how much water, exactly how much heat, exactly how long. The mastery that looks effortless, but represents decades of attention, of care, of doing one thing well through endless repetition. You eat slowly, but not as slowly as breakfast, hunger asserting itself, your body requiring fuel after the morning's activities. After hours of sitting and sweeping and existing in this place that demands constant energy without providing abundant calories. Each bite is attended to, or you attempt to attend to each bite. The instruction to be mindful, remaining constant even when your body just wants to consume, to fill the emptiness, to satisfy the biological imperative that cares nothing for spiritual practice. The miso soup is salty, warm, deeply satisfying in ways that transcend its simple ingredients. You sip it between bites of rice, the combination creating completeness that either component alone wouldn't achieve. The pairing so fundamental to Japanese cuisine that you've forgotten there was ever a time you ate rice without soup, soup without rice, the two existing separately rather than as complementary halves of a whole. Your mind quiets during eating, or at least quiets somewhat, the focus required to eat mindfully, combined with the satisfaction of hunger being addressed, creating space where thoughts don't dominate, where there's just tasting, chewing, swallowing, the direct experience of eating without elaborate commentary about the eating, without stories about yourself eating, without comparison to other meals or judgment about whether this meal measures up to some imagined ideal meal. This clarity doesn't last, never lasts. Thoughts reasserting themselves, the monastery's schedule pressing into consciousness, afternoon activities looming, the interview with the teacher approaching. Anxiety about it rising despite your attempts to stay present with lunch, to be here, rather than in the imagined future where you're failing to demonstrate understanding you don't actually have. But for moments, seconds, strung together into perhaps a minute or two, there's just this: rice, soup, the taste of pickled radish, the texture of greens, your hand lifting bowl to mouth, your throat swallowing, your stomach receiving, the simple animal satisfaction of eating when hungry, of being warm when it was cold, of resting when tired. The basic goods that humans evolved to appreciate long before anyone invented meditation or monasteries, or the idea that these basic experiences could be doorways to something beyond themselves. The meal ends too quickly and not quickly enough. Appetite satisfied but not fully. The portions calculated to sustain without excess. To prevent hunger without creating fullness that makes afternoon meditation difficult, the balance point between deprivation and indulgence that the monastery maintains through careful attention to quantities, to needs, to the collective body rather than individual desires. You clean your bowls with the same ritual as breakfast water, swirling, drinking, the cleaning becoming consumption, waste becoming sustenance. The practical and symbolic merging in actions that serve multiple purposes simultaneously, that maintain hygiene while teaching lessons about nothing being separate, everything connected. Consumption and cleaning and sustaining, all part of the same process. The wrapped bowls return to their shelf. Your body is warm now, fed, ready for the afternoon's sitting, even though ready is probably the wrong word, because you're never really ready to sit for hours doing nothing. You're just marginally more capable of it after eating than before, slightly more able to maintain attention when your stomach isn't contracting with hunger, sending urgent messages that override spiritual aspirations with biological imperatives. 2 p.m. Dokusan, private interview. The bell rings 3 strikes, distinct patterns signaling that Dokusan will begin, that the teacher is ready to meet with students individually, that the door to the interview room is open and you may approach if it's your turn, if your name was on today's list. If this is your moment to attempt once again to demonstrate understanding you're not certain you possess. Your heart rate increases immediately, predictably. The anxiety you've been managing all day suddenly acute, impossible to ignore, manifesting as tightness in chest, shallow breathing. Hands that want to fidget, but mustn't, because fidgeting isn't zen-like, isn't appropriate, would reveal the nervousness you're supposed to have transcended through all this meditation, through all this training in equanimity that apparently hasn't trained you to be equanimous about being evaluated by someone who can see through every pretense you've constructed. You walk to the interview room, small building separate from the main hall, traditional Japanese architecture with sliding doors and tatami mats, and the smell of incense that never quite dissipates, that has soaked into the wood and paper and fabric over decades of these interviews, these confrontations between student and teacher, these attempts to communicate what can't be communicated, to demonstrate what can't be demonstrated, to prove understanding that dissolves the moment you try to grasp it. You wait outside, kneeling in seiza position, sitting on your heels, back straight, hands on thighs, the formal posture of respect and readiness. Other students are ahead of you, entering one by one, emerging minutes later, with expressions that reveal nothing, maintaining the silence that surrounds these interviews. The privacy that protects students from comparison, from knowing whether others are succeeding where you're failing, from the competitive dynamics that would arise if these encounters were public rather than intimate. The person ahead of you emerges, bows to the doorway, walks past without meeting your eyes. You rise, knees protesting slightly after kneeling on hard floor, approach the entrance, bow deeply, slide the door open just enough to enter, slide it closed behind you, the movements prescribed, formal, buying you seconds before you must speak, before the interview actually begins, and your inadequacy becomes visible once again. The teacher Roshi sits on a raised platform at the far end of the small room. Formal robes, straight posture, expression neutral but attentive, eyes that see everything even when appearing to see nothing. A bell sits beside him, The bell he'll ring if your response is unsatisfactory. The sound you've heard multiple times before, the sound that dismisses, rejects, indicates you haven't yet penetrated the koan, haven't yet seen what needs to be seen. You approach, prostrate yourself, fully, forehead to the floor, arms extended, then rise to sitting position, facing him, perhaps 6 feet of space between you, close enough to see the wrinkles around his eyes, the age spots on his hands, the reality of him as human being, not abstract authority. Though this recognition doesn't make the encounter less intimidating, doesn't make your heart rate slow to normal, doesn't make the words come any easier, he waits, doesn't prompt, doesn't ask questions, just waits, with the patience of someone who's conducted thousands of these interviews, who has all the time in the world, who isn't uncomfortable with silence, with the pressure of waiting, with watching someone struggle to find words for what exists beyond words. You breathe, attempt to settle, to become present, to access whatever understanding you've developed through 8 months of sitting with Mu, of being Mu, of trying to embody this koan that asks, "Does a dog have Buddha nature?" To which the teacher Joshu answered, "Mu," meaning nothing, or no, or negation, or the sound a cow makes depending on interpretation, or something else entirely that you're supposed to realize directly rather than understand conceptually. Mu, you begin, then stop, because beginning with the word feels wrong, feels like you're talking about it rather than presenting it, like you're still outside the koan looking in rather than being the koan completely, dissolving into it, becoming it so thoroughly that there's no you and no Mu, but just this moment, this reality, this being that requires no explanation because it's already complete. You try again, differently, making a sound not quite a shout, not quite a growl, something primal, something that comes from below thought, that expresses Mu without naming it. That is Mu rather than describes Mu, or so you hope, or so you're attempting, though the self-consciousness of attempting probably undermines the attempt, creates the separation that shouldn't exist if you'd truly understood. The teacher's expression doesn't change. He waits, letting your sound fade, letting the silence return, giving space for you to either continue or collapse into awkwardness, his patience absolute. His willingness to sit here indefinitely greater than your ability to maintain this performance, this attempt to be what you're not yet able to be. Before thinking, he says quietly, "What is Mu?"
The question is familiar. He's asked variations of it before, pointing you toward direct experience prior to conceptualization, toward the reality that exists before you construct stories about it, before language shapes it, before the discriminating mind that creates subject and object, self and other, understanding and confusion, begins its work. But you don't know how to access that place, that moment before thinking, because by the time you're aware of trying to access it, you're already thinking, already in the dualistic mind that separates knower from known, already lost in the maze of self-consciousness that makes direct experience impossible, like trying to see your own eye, like trying to taste your own tongue, the instrument of perception unable to perceive itself without creating false distance, artificial separation. You sit with the question, with the impossibility of it, with the frustration that rises, familiar frustration, same frustration that's arisen in previous interviews, that you've sat with for months during meditation, that hasn't resolved, hasn't transformed into insight, has just become familiar frustration, tedious frustration, the kind you've made peace with without actually transcending it. The teacher watches this, sees it, knows what's happening in your mind, with the clarity that comes from having sat with his own koans decades ago, from having experienced this same frustration, this same sense of being trapped in a puzzle that has no logical solution, because it's not meant to be solved logically, is meant to exhaust logic, to push you beyond conceptual thinking into something else, something direct, something that can't be taught, but only discovered. Time passes. Maybe 1 minute, maybe 5. Time becoming unclear in this small room, with incense smoke and unwavering attention, and the pressure of trying to demonstrate what you haven't realized. Finally, he reaches for the bell. The sound is sharp, clear, final. Interview over. You've failed again. Not failed, exactly, because failure implies there was a method that didn't work, but haven't succeeded, haven't shown what needs to be shown, haven't penetrated the koan, despite months of effort, despite hours of sitting, despite genuine dedication that apparently isn't enough, or isn't the right kind, or is still too much self, too much trying, too much seeking that prevents finding. Continue, he says simply, the instruction he gives to everyone who isn't ready, the encouragement that's both genuine and minimal, acknowledging your effort without praising it, maintaining the pressure that's supposed to eventually break through, like water wearing away stone, constant pressure over time, creating change that's imperceptible moment to moment, but real, cumulative, transformative. You bow deeply, forehead to floor, gratitude mixing with disappointment, appreciation for his time mixing with frustration at your inability. The complex emotions that accompany these interviews, that you'll carry back to your cushion, that will inform the next weeks of sitting until the next interview, the cycle continuing until something shifts or doesn't shift, until breakthrough comes or doesn't come, until you either realize what Mu points toward or acknowledge defeat and return to ordinary life, where questions have answers and problems have solutions, and paradoxes are intellectual curiosities rather than lived realities you're supposed to embody. You slide the door open, exit backward so as not to turn your back on the teacher, slide it closed, bow once more to the doorway, then walk slowly back to your room, back to your cushion, back to the sitting that continues, regardless of success or failure, that requires nothing from you except showing up, except being present, except continuing to face the wall and watch your breath, and let thoughts arise and pass, and slowly, incrementally, barely perceptibly, become someone who can sit still without complete agony, which isn't enlightenment, but is something, is change, is progress, even if it's not the dramatic transformation you imagined when you first arrived. And still, somewhere deep in your hoping, fearing mind.
Imagine might finally happen tomorrow, or next week, or eventually, or maybe never. But you'll keep sitting anyway, because what else is there to do? Where else is there to go? This practice having become your life, whether you've mastered it or not. Have a Zen night.